We're exploring Likutei Sichos, volume 20, Vayishlach, Sicha number 2. So the discussion is that when they finally had the showdown of Yaakov and Esav, and they meet, and thank God, he doesn't kill him. He accepts the gift, I guess, and whatever, the various commentaries, how that worked, it played itself out, and they hugged and kissed. And then when it's all over, Esav says to Yaakov, I'm heading back home to Seir. Maybe come with me. Let's go together. The assumption was that Yaakov's going there too. And Yaakov says to Esav, do me a favor, do yourself a favor. I got young children and a lot of sheep, and you're not going to be able to go at my pace. So you go ahead, and I will take my time with the children and the sheep. You don't want to link yourself with me. Keep moving. I'll catch up with you. I will come to you, my master, to Seir. But in the end, he never went. He never went. It says he went till Sukkos. So what happened? So there's a discussion in the Gemara, the Talmud, that Yaakov actually lied to Esav. Why? For self-preservation. Even though, thank God, there was a miracle that he didn't kill him. But you never know with an Esav. He could change his mind in a minute. And therefore, Yaakov, count your blessings. Sei mir gesinnt. I'll see you later. And he misled him. He lied to him. He told him, go, but he didn't go. This is how the Gemara reads this story. And this becomes a halacha in Jewish law, as we will see in the Gemara and in the halacha and Rambam, the code of Jewish law, that from this we learn out a halacha, that if a Jew meets a non-Jew, and the non-Jew is asking too many questions, you got to fear for your life. And therefore, you have to do certain precautions. The Rebbe right away at the beginning of the Sicha points out that the poskim, the halachic decisors, have decided, not just today, hundreds of years ago already, that this law is not applicable today in the same way. Today, it's not like it was back when it was totally lawlessness. And therefore, if you meet a non-Jew, you got to watch for your life every second. No, it wasn't. It's changed. And today, again, today can mean for hundreds of years. I don't know exactly the time frame, but it seems like, a long time. The halachic decisors have said, you don't look at every non-Jew as suspect of wanting to kill you. In fact, they have law and order, and they'll punish you if you kill somebody. So this law is tempered. The Rebbe puts us right at the beginning of the Sicha, which is interesting, to make that point. But nevertheless, going back to the original halacha, the way it's brought in the Gemara and in the codes, Rambam, etc., you got to watch for your life. And it's derived from the story of Yaakov. So this is going to be a fantastic exploration. So, and by the way, the Gemara also says not just this particular issue, that when you meet the guy and he's asking you where you're going, you should lie to him and tell him you're going further when you're only going closer. But the Gemara has a whole list of precautions to be taken. For example, don't be alone. Don't be alone with him. He can kill you. If he's walking next to you in the street by accident, make sure he's on your right. The concept being that your right hand is available in case you need to defend yourself. Also, if you're on an incline, the Jew and the Gentile are on an incline, either going up or down, make sure the Jew is up and the Gentile is down, because otherwise he'll crush your skull. This is straight from the Gemara and the Mishnah. So there's a whole bunch of precautions. And then in connection to that, the Gemara continues and says, and if he asks you for directions, if he asks you where you're heading, you should lie. Basically, you should tell him that you're going further, even though you're going close. Let's open up and explore this whole concept. We're going to see that there's a couple of approaches to this, but this is what seems to be the halachic approach of the Gemara. So here we have it. The Gemara says, top of the left column, that if a non-Jew asks a Jew, where are you going? You should broaden the road. That's the language. As Yaakov Avinu did to Esav Harasha. And Rashi, on the Gemara, says that he lied, as I just explained. Because he felt the danger, he lied. He said, I'll join my master at Seir, but he never got there. And from here, we learn a halacha that if one, this is all Rashi, that if one is intending to travel a parcel, let's assume it's a mile, tell the Gentile when he asks you where you're going, tell him, you know where I'm going? 2 parses. Because maybe he'll delay hurting you. The assumption is he wants to hurt you. But maybe if he knows you're going 2 parses or what have you, you're going a longer way, he's going to scheme his plan to hurt you for later on in the trip. And in the interim, you'll turn away from the road. You should lie. And this is all derived because Yaakov lied. Now let's go over to the right column. So the first thing is the Medrash. The Medrash says a whole different story. Yaakov is a man of truth. How could it be that Yaakov is a man of truth? Yaakov said to Esau, I'll meet you at Har Seir, at Mount Seir. When did he go? The Medrash says, we looked through the whole Torah, we never found any discussion that he went to Mount Seir. Says the Medrash, he will go. He's going to go when Mashiach comes. So the Medrash seems to be very cut and dry that he didn't lie at all. He said he's going to go, and he's going to go. Okay, it's going to take him a long time. No big deal. But it's not like he told any sort of lie according to the Medrash. So nominally, it looks like the Gemara and the Medrash have 2 different narratives. The Gemara has a halachic narrative, which assumes that Esau is a bad guy. And from here, we learned that Yaakov actually lied to him, and that's what you should do. And the Medrash, we have a different story. Yaakov didn't lie. Yaakov would never lie. It's just a long story that's going to take a long trip. Okay, that's not a problem. The Medrash could read things differently. And then the Gemara, there are 2 areas of Torah. It's not problematic. However, the problem becomes that when we open up Rashi on the Torah, 2nd paragraph of the right column, as opposed to Rashi in the Gemara, Rashi on the Chumash, Rashi brings together the Gemara and the Medrash together. He cuts and pastes part of the Gemara and part of the Medrash. And Rashi says, what did Yaakov do? He broadened the road. He reckoned, if he intends to hurt me, he'll await my coming. Meaning to say, he won't be able to hurt me because he's waiting for me later. He broadened the way. And he didn't go until Mashiach comes, when he will, in fact, go to Seir. So Rashi seems to conclude he did not lie, because Rashi makes the point to quote from the Medrash that he will, in fact, go when Mashiach comes. But Rashi is borrowing from the Gemara that he did stretch it a little bit. And he broadened the way, and he was afraid maybe for his life, and therefore he made him wait, but he didn't lie. So the issue is that how does Rashi view this story and this halacha? We have, I guess, a contradiction between the 2 Rashis. That's the question. Rashi, again, the Gemara and the Medrash is not really a question. They can learn things in different ways. But if Rashi views the story that Yaakov lied as he interprets the Gemara, and then when he opens the Chumash, Rashi views the story, he didn't lie. So this is a contradiction. How does Rashi view it? The beauty of a contradiction and the beauty of studying Torah properly, and the way the Rabbi teaches us to study Torah, is that through the contradictions, you see the insight. The Rebbe says this is a contradiction, but it's not. It's showing you that the 2 Rashis are different, because Rashi has 2 goals. When he's interpreting Gemara, it's different than when he's interpreting Chumash. Rashi's principle is that he does pshat, yes, literal. However, there's literal of Gemara. I guess it's a legal approach or whatever. But Rashi does it as literal as possible. And there's literal of the verse, which would be true more so to the narrative. And therefore, they don't have to be the same, and they're in fact not the same. The Gemara, Rashi reads, and Rashi assumes that the Gemara is interpreting that from a legal perspective, this was a danger. And from here we derive that you got to watch yourself from danger, and you got to lie. We assume the danger. We don't just suspect a possibility. We assume it. And that's how Rashi interprets the Gemara, because the Gemara, again, from a legal perspective, that's how the story is seen. However, when you read the story in the Torah, and Rashi's job there is pshute shel mikra, the literal interpretation of the actual verse, which means true to the narrative. On the level of the narrative, putting aside halachic takeaways. From the level of the narrative, there's no reason to assume that Esav wanted to kill him. In fact, in the simple storyline, again, not looking between the lines of what we learned from Medrash and Gemara, in the simple storyline of the verse, Esav hugged him and kissed him. And everything is good. They're going to live happily ever after. So on this level, does Rashi interpret that Yaakov didn't assume danger? He suspected. You never know. Because for many years, Esav was very angry at him, wanted to kill him. So yeah, but to say that he assumed the danger, And therefore, on a pshat level, Rashi is not comfortable to say that Yaakov lied. Why would he lie? There's no assumption of danger. But instead, he misled him. And therefore, there's a reconciliation. The two Rashis are not in conflict. They're approaching two areas of Torah, the halachic or Talmudic level of Torah, and the narrative level of Torah. And this, says the Rebbe, is hinted in two ways in the Rashi itself, the Rashi on the Torah. Number one, I underlined that Rashi says he broadened the way. See, Rashi didn't have to say that. Rashi didn't have to say that. He should just say, he should just go straight into his commentary. Broadened represents as opposed to lengthening, you see. I'm going to point out that in the Gemara, it also says he broadened the road. But in Rashi, on Pshat, every word is literal. And therefore, it's more precise. When Rashi says he broadened the road, he means as opposed to lengthening the road, you see. In Rashi on the Gemara, Rashi says that from here we learn, and the way the Gemara thinks it from a legal perspective, you should send him flying further. You should lie to him. He told Esav he's going all the way to Seir, only went to Sukkos. And therefore the takeaway for us is, if you want to go one parsha, tell the guy two. Lie to him. That's not called broadening the way. That's called lengthening the way. That's called lying, straight out, which we don't like to lie, but this is considered an assumed danger from the perspective of the Gemara. However, Rashi on the Torah interprets the particular narrative of that story that because Esav showed this love, no, he didn't have to lie to him. He wouldn't feel right to lie to him because he didn't assume danger. He suspected it. So rather than lengthening the way, rather than telling him, I'm going all the way, lying, no, he broadened the way. The language of broadened the way is precise in Rashi, as Rashi on the Torah is always precise to be by the pshat. And what does it mean broaden? Broaden means I'm not going further. It's just that my way is going to take me much longer, which is very much supported by the actual language of the verse, where Yaakov tells him, you go ahead and we're going to go slow. I got the children, I got the sheep. So therefore, broaden the way is emphasized in Rashi. Although those words are not really necessary, but not for this point, because Rashi is trying to make the point that on the narrative level of Torah study, he didn't lengthen the way, he didn't lie to him. He broadened, he extended the trip. He said, yeah, it's going to take a long time. Because in case of not assumed danger, just suspected danger, let's call it, you can mislead him, but you can't lie to him. You can tell him I'm coming, even though it's going to take you a very long time to get there. Broaden the way. That's one diuk. The other diuk is, and I underlined it, comparing the two Rashis. The Rashi on the Gemara says, you should tell the guy a lie and tell him you're going much further, because maybe he'll delay hurting you. From that language, it means that we're sure the guy is going to hurt you. We're assuming he's going to hurt you. The only question is, could you delay the hurting, and then meanwhile you'll be able to get away? Whereas Rashi in the Chumash writes differently. That Yaakov reckoned, if he intends to hurt me, you know what I mean, let him wait. This is a very powerful diuk. A very powerful diuk, a precision, where we see that Rashi uses different verbiage in the Gemara versus the Chumash. And therefore, because in the Gemara, he's assuming, like I wrote at the bottom of the screen, the bottom line of this whole screen, this whole discussion. In the Gemara, he assumes the danger is assumed. The only question is maybe he'll delay hurting me. So I'll tell him, yeah, I'm coming all the way. So yeah, Esav has no need to he'll hurt him later. But in the Rashi and Chumash, if he intends to hurt me, it's a maybe. It's not an assumption. It's a suspicion, the possibility. And therefore you shouldn't lie in such a case. You can only mislead, etc. So this is powerful stuff. The Rebbe, first of all, opened our eyes that this Rashi, which most people would read and say, well, it's cut and paste from the Gemara and the Medrash, and it's a little cholent. The way I understand the Sicha is the Rashi is reading it in line with the Medrash, that there was no need to really lie, but he's borrowing from the Gemara the concept, but not the concept of lying, the concept of misleading, because there was no definite what's it called? There was no definite danger. Okay. So now what we've done is we have studied the Rashi and the Chumash as opposed to the Rashi and the Gemara, and our bottom line is what you see on the bottom of the screen. That Rashi in the Gemara holds that there's a lie because the danger is assumed, whereas in the Chumash, its danger is not assumed and he did not actually lie. There's one more diak that I did not mention, and that is that Rashi in the Chumash does not say Esav Harasha. In the Gemara, in other words, in the Gemara, this is not a diuk in Rashi, but it's a diuk in the Gemara. Look at the language of the Gemara. I underlined it. That the Gemara's position is that you have to broaden the road. You have to lie to him, like Yaakov Avinu did to Esav Harasha. The emphasis is the wickedness, because that's how the Gemara assumes it and reads it on the legal level, whereas Rashi does not make that assumption. Okay. So now that we have this, we move on now further, and the Rebbe is going to come along and say that, okay, so I took the takeaway, the final bottom line from the last screen, put it at the top of this screen. So we now have two approaches, the Rashi Gemara approach and the Rashi Pshat approach, of whether or not we assume danger. And in the Gemara, on the legal level, we do. On the Pshat level of the narrative, we don't, because Esau was hugging him. Comes along the Rebbe and says, we're going to find something wonderful, that the Rebbe is going to argue that in this Rashi and in this approach is actually a halachic ramification. But what do you mean? We just finished saying that this is the Pshat narrative story. Whereas at the halachic level, you got to look what Rashi says on the Gemara. Yeah. But the fact is, says the Rebbe, we're going to discuss a Rambam, which is clearly halacha, and the Rambam seems to be problematic. And we're going to explain that the Rambam actually rules in Jewish law now, not in Pshuta Shel Mikra narrative of Torah stories. In line, that's why I put the Rambam under the right column, in line with the Rashi of the verse. So let's get into this. This is one of the Rebbe's things that he does very often in Sichas, that he'll explain to you a Rashi on the Torah, which is Pshuta Shel Mikra, which means it's a simple narrative of the story. But then Rashi says things that Rashi is not a book of halacha, and the Torah, and the Chumash certainly not. However, being that the Rebbe says all areas of Torah are connected, and Rashi has many levels in it. It's known from the Alter Rebbe that Rashi also contains a wine of Torah and Kabbalah, and sometimes you find in Rashi hints to halacha. The Rebbe argues, the Rebbe wants to extrapolate, and he makes a very strong point, that there's a Rambam, which is a halachic book, which is very misunderstood, not clear. And I'm going to suggest that it's not discussed by other commentaries to its fullest. And we'll explain it by saying Rambam is actually a holdout from the other codes of law, because he's actually going to rule based on the narrative of the Torah of Esau, which is in line with the Rashi on the Pshat level of Torah. Let's take a look at it. So now we're going to start discussing Jewish law. And Jewish law is based on the Gemara. That's how it works. What does the Gemara say? Again, repeating that the Gemara says a non-Jew asks you where you're headed, you should broaden the road like Yaakov Avinu did to Esav of Russia. And where did we see that he lied, that he broadened the way? Because first he said, I'll join my master at Seir. And then the verse says Yaakov went to Sukkot, which means he never went to Sukkot. He stopped. That's the Gemara. On this Gemara, Rashi explains, as we already know, and the other codes, the Beis Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch, and many other commentaries. They explain it. So what's the takeaway? You want to give me law, you got to tell me bottom line. That if one intends, like we said earlier, one intends to travel a parsa, you should tell the Gentile 2 parsas. Straight out lie. The Gemara doesn't explicitly say it. The Gemara says you should broaden the road, like Yaakov did to Esau. And brings 2 verses to make the point. He told him he's going to Seir, and he went to Sukkot. But it doesn't explicitly extrapolate the details, but the codes, and Rashi, and the code of law, Shulchan Aruch, which is a to-do, it's law. Law, you got to be clear. And what does it say? As a, for instance, if you want to go 1 parsa, 1 mile, tell him you're going 2 miles. Lie to him, because it's dangerous. When we look in Rambam, in his code of law, Rambam quotes the Gemara, but he doesn't add that extrapolation and that detail. Rambam says simply, he broadened the road like Yaakov broadened for Esav. As it is stated, I'll join my master at Seir. And the question is, being that that Rambam likes to be as clear as possible, it's halacha. Why doesn't he say the bottom line? He's just saying broaden the road. He's speaking like he's a Gemara. He's not speaking like he's a halachist. Halacha, tell me what to do. Broaden the road. What should I do? Broaden the road. Should I pour cement on the road? That's not the language of a law book, of a legal code. That's the language of Gemara. The legal codes, as we see in the left column, the way Rashi writes it, and the Shulchan Aruch, it tells you what to do. If you want to go so far, tell me go on further. Tell me. Be explicit. That's what law does. Whereas Rambam pretty much cuts and pastes a lot from the Gemara, and he doesn't explain it. It's a very short entry in the Rambam. Why is he remaining, so to speak, mysterious in his language, as opposed to all his other contemporaries and the other halachists? I'm assuming that pre-Rebbe, most people dismissed it and said, well, that's what he means. The Rebbe doesn't accept that. The Rebbe is going to have other diukim, other precisions to prove this. But this already is a very strong argument. The Rambam, throughout his code, takes the Gemara language, which is ambiguous, and clarifies it in legalese. And here he doesn't. He leaves it ambiguous. You should broaden it. It's a problem. It's like a question. It's like a strong diuk. Says the Rebbe, I want to suggest, and this is mind-blowing, that actually Rambam is aligned with the Rashi and Pshutit Shel Mikra. It's so creative how the Rebbe crosses the areas of Torah. Once we already accomplished on our first screen, the first part of the Sicha, that there's a difference between Rashi and Gemara and Rashi and Pshat by necessity, and we discussed it. Says the Rebbe, I want to suggest that there's also a difference between all the other decisors in halacha and Rambam in halacha. All the others decide that what? That the danger is assumed, that you should lie. And the Rambam, in his book of halacha, perhaps, the Rebbe says, not perhaps, the Rebbe says in the footnote, and the Rambam derives, since this halacha is derived from the story of Esav, and in the literal story, as Rashi told us in Pshat, there's no danger assumed, and therefore he didn't lie, he only misled. That becomes a law. You can't assume danger. Why should you assume danger? He's just asking you where to go. Did he threaten you? And therefore Rambam says, broaden the road like Yaakov broadened for Esav. The Rebbe has a couple of diukim here, a couple of precisions in the language of the Rambam, as opposed to the language of the Gemara, which show this point that Rambam is interpreting the Gemara on the legal level to mean more in line with the Rashi on Chumash versus Rashi on Gemara. Namely, that we don't assume danger and we don't lie, we only mislead. And that's why Rambam, first of all, that explains the big question. How come Rambam is not clear about what he's saying? He doesn't delineate the law, he just leaves it general. That was the big problem. Also, notice that Rambam does not call Esav a Rasha. If he's quoting the Gemara calls Esav a Rasha. Rambam doesn't. The Gemara says, as Yaakov Avinu did to Esav a Rasha, I underlined it in the Gemara. And Rambam, as quoting the Gemara, says, like Yaakov broadened for Esav. Then it says that because the Rambam is trying to de-emphasize the Rasha part. The Rasha part in the Gemara, the footnotes Rabbi explains, because generally when you mention a Rasha, you should give him the bad title, just like when you mention the tzaddik, you should give him the good title. There's ways to explain it in the Gemara. But on the legal work, the Rambam omits the title of Yaakov Avinu or the title of Esav or Rasha. He just says Yaakov to Esav, because on a legal level, this is not about somebody evil doing something to someone good. We're not assuming evil. Also notice that the Gemara's language is as Yaakov did to Esav. Rambam's language is Yaakov broadened to Esav. This is a deviation from his source. Rambam, like most halachic codes, is based on the Gemara. Why would he change it? The Gemara says Yaakov did to Esav. Says Rambam, like Yaakov broadened for Esav. He's softening it up. He's trying to make the point that that this is not an actual did. He didn't actually like him. He broadened. He stretched the truth. He misled. That's okay. It's a precaution. You're not doing a sin. It's always good to take a precaution. And another diuk, another precision in the Rambam, which is so striking, the Gemara quotes 2 verses and Rambam quotes only 1. The Gemara, to make its point, that Yaakov lied, that Yaakov deviated, the Gemara brings 2 verses. One is, Yaakov said, I'll meet you at Seir, but then it says he only went to Sukkot. And the way the left column, Rashi and the codes would interpret, that's an indication that he lied. He said, I'm going to A, he really went to B, only to B. Rambam only quotes the first verse, which is a tremendous deviation, which means he's dropping the whole point of the lie. If you have both verses together, it means you're bringing home the message. Look, he lied. He said he's going all the way to A, only went to B. The Rambam only says he said he's going to A, and he didn't get there yet. And therefore, that's how he's reading the verse of Sukkot. He didn't get there yet. He went to Sukkot. He will eventually go to, but that the point is that Rambam is de-emphasizing, the Rasha aspect is de-emphasizing that he did anything more than just broadening the way, and he's de-emphasizing the lie. It was a white lie. It was a stretch. It was a misleading. This is a fantastic stuff. Reading in a Rambam. That Rambam rules differently, which I don't see other codes. I looked up. I'm not a big Torah scholar, but I looked up on Rambam and all the codes, and they leave it alone. They're good with it. The Rebbe is not good with it. And he's seeing that Rambam is clearly different than the Shulchan Aruch in a very big way. And again, to walk away from this screen, let's do the takeaway that what? That the Shulchan Aruch and the other commentaries, and the halachas will assume that if you meet a Gentile, again, this doesn't apply nowadays, but in days when they were considered, that they didn't have law and order, that the danger is assumed and you should lie. And whereas Rambam in code of law will say, based on the narrative of the story of Esav, the danger is not assumed, and therefore you don't really have a right to lie, but yeah, find a way to mislead. Comes along the Rebbe now. So this seems all really good and fine. We made the Rambam very sweet. What did we do so far? We made peace between the 2 Rashis. We made the Rambam align with the Rashi of the Chumash. And we explained all of the diukim, all the nuances between Rambam and the Gemara. And it's a wonderful thing. There's only a problem. The problem is we're going to go to the next screen, we're going to see that in the next section of the Gemara gives examples of stories where there was actual danger, and they saved themselves by lying. So how could Rambam read this Gemara that this is only misleading? Let's take a look. Here you have in front of you the Gemara in context. In the prior screen, I only gave you number 2. I just put these numbers in to help. These numbers are mine. But let's read the whole story of the Gemara. The Gemara starts off at the Mishnah and then the Gemara, that all kind of different laws involved with being careful with a Gentile in those days. Don't be alone with him. If you're walking near him, he should be to your right. As I mentioned earlier, if there's an incline, he should be above, he should be below, so he doesn't smash your head open. And then immediately following, the Gemara says, if a non-Jew asks where you're going, broaden the road like Yaakov did to Esau. I'll join my master at Seir, and they went all your sukkahs. And then the Gemara goes right into stories. One story is Rabbi Akiva's students were heading to Geziv, and they met bandits. And the bandits asked where they're heading. And they said they're going to Akku. They lied. Akku is much closer than Geziv. I'm sorry, Akku is much further than Geziv. Akku is much further than Geziv. They were heading to Geziv. But the bandits asked, where are you going? They said, we're going to Akku. Much further. And they were spared because they followed this halach. And a similar thing happened to Rabbi Menashe, that he too lied to a bunch of thieves, and he was spared. So the question is, how did we go walk away from the last screen? That this was the bottom line of the whole discussion. That unlike Rashi and Shulchan Aruch that assume that the danger is assumed and therefore you should lie, Rambam rules based on this Gemara. That's the source of halacha. It's all based on the Gemara. Rambam can't argue with the Gemara. The Gemara that Rambam assumes that the way we see number two, let's call it, is that what? It's not really a lying, it's just a stretching, it's the broadening of the road. It's a misleading because we don't assume that he's going to kill you. And then, so how do you jive that with the fact that right away the next piece is a story, two stories about Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Menashe, that they were in a position where they were saved because they lied. They didn't broaden the road. They elongated the road, which is an outright lie. So this is a big problem to the whole Rebbe's approach, how the Rambam rules. So the Rebbe says it's not a problem. If you step back and you see it all in context, it's not a problem. Remember, the Gemara has three stanzas here. One after the other. There's no punctuation in Gemara. The first one is a general concept that what you got to be careful with a Gentile. Don't walk next to him. Make sure you're not on bottom, he's on top. This is not assuming that he's dangerous. It doesn't mean that you have to assume he's dangerous. But be careful. Take a precaution, especially in those days. Doesn't mean that you see a Gentile, you have to start lying to him. You see a Gentile, you should walk in the street and say, you know what, I'm not coming, I'm going. Don't lie to him. You're not supposed to do sins and assume that but be precautious. That's number one. Take precautions. That's a general concept before you have any reason to assume bad. Then there is step number two. What if the non-Jew asks you where you're headed? Aha! He's not just minding his own business. He asked you where he's headed. Here the question is, what does this conversation mean? When the non-Jew approached you and asked you where you're headed, does he now move from the category of a general suspicion and precaution to assumption of danger? And here's where the differences be between Rashi and the codes versus Rambam. Rashi and the codes will say, if a Gentile asks a destination, you assume danger. Rambam says, no. He asked you the destination. Maybe it's curiosity, maybe whatever. Maybe it's in a package. You can't assume danger. You should have precaution because you're supposed to have precaution anyway. But don't assume danger. And then there is stanza 3. In stanza 3, there's clear danger. You're talking about bandits. It was obvious that they were bandits. Maybe they were armed to the teeth. So here says the Rebbe beautifully that if you step back, you make a clear system. In the Rashi approach and the Shulchan Aruch, they see the three stanzas of the Gemara as I enumerated them, that 2 and 3 go together. Number one, item number one, stanza number one is, you meet a Gentile, you happen to walk next to him. Be precautious, but you're not supposed to start lying to him. There's no assumption of danger just because he's in the street. However, 2 and 3, that they represent an assumption of danger. If he either engages you and he asks you where you're going, that's a red flag. Alternatively, if he's a bunch of bandits and thieves, that's a red flag. So 2 and 3 go together. And that's how the codes and Rashi would learn this story in the Gemara, this ruling in the Gemara. And therefore, yeah, when the guy asks you about where you're heading, you should lie to him. Why is he asking you? Aha! That's a sign he's like a bandit. That automatically makes him a bandit just because he's asking you. Rambam doesn't see it that way. Rambam says a Gentile asking the destination is not an assumed danger. Unless he's a bandit, he's loaded, he's whatever it is, yeah, watch out. But if he's asking a destination, he's like a regular Gentile. And therefore Rambam would put 1 and 2 together. One is the general conversation that, you should be precautious. Don't start lying to Goyim all the time because maybe he's a bad guy. But keep your distance, keep your height, edge. If he asks you where you're heading, you should stretch it a little. But there's no need yet to lie. There's no need to assume danger. The third stanza, when there's bandits, of course you should lie. And that's what happened to the students of Rabbi Akiva and what happened to Rabbi Menashe. So the whole thing is settled. And therefore we don't have an issue. We go back to the original thing. The way Rashi and the code see it and the way Rambam sees it. And the Rebbe beautifully takes away a halachic application to nowadays. Nowadays, in the last, a few hundreds of years that the codes, the poskim, have ruled that Gentiles, I guess it's talking about normal countries of law and order, they have their own system of law and order, and therefore they frown upon people hurting each other for no reason. And therefore you don't assume the danger. You don't assume danger. You probably still should take precautions. A person should take precautions. But you don't assume danger. But what if a Gentile nowadays asks you where you're heading? Should that suddenly be a red flag? Should that suddenly mean, aha, he's a bandit? Or no, he's just having a conversation. And that, says the Rebbe, might be the difference between Rashi and Rambam, the codes and Rambam. The codes would say the Gentile asked you, where are you going? Aha. He reverts back to like the olden days, where danger is assumed, because he asked you where you're going. Whereas Rambam would say no. Asking a destination doesn't mean anything. Just, be precautious, but don't assume that this makes him a bad guy. Rebbe concludes the Sicha with a fantastic lesson in Avodas Hashem. And the Rebbe tells us a beautiful thing. That the law that teaches us that you should keep yourself safe from Goyim and Goyishkeit, the spiritual problem, not to be drawn into Goyishkeit and to stuff that's not kosher for us and not where our heads need to be, etc. Not just danger, physical danger. It all goes together. Spiritual danger, Goyim and Goyishkeit. Not good for a yid. Nowadays, as much as ever. And you might say the Goyishkeit is more dangerous today because they're nice to us, they can schlep us in. As I'd like to tell my people here, they used to kill us and now they're marrying us. And you don't know which is worse. So the law that how does a Jew protect himself from a goy is derived from the story where Yaakov told Esav, I'm coming. And when will he come? When Mashiach comes. That means that Yaakov makes a statement, I'm on the way to Mashiach. Says the Rebbe, that's a beautiful lesson to us. How am I going to protect myself from a goy? Physically and spiritually, falling into goyishkeit, falling into danger, falling into all kind of problems that the goyishkeit represents. When I have the attitude that I'm unequal with him, I'm in Galus together with him, and I'm dealing with the same problems as him, and everything was bogging me down, just like my Gentile neighbor. So I just exposed myself in physical danger and spiritual, mental danger, everything. I'm with him. He's right next to me. But if I broaden the way, I tell him, guess what, Mr. Neighbor? You're a nice guy and everything else, but I'm not really here. I'm on a journey. I'm heading to Mashiach. I'm not there yet, but I'm on the path. My whole life in Galus is really on the path to Mashiach, and my head is already there. Therefore, the guy can't touch you. Just like in the story that he told Asa, I'm going to say it. When a Yid has the attitude, and he expresses that attitude, that people around him see it, that he's living Mashiach, which is something that I spoke about very, very strong in the last years, before Gimel Tammuz. Like, what's the point to live Mashiach? When Mashiach comes, we'll be Mashiach. No, the Rebbe quoted then that in the time of Mitzrayim, even when it was in Galus still, it was dark by the Goyim, Makas Choshech, it was light by the Yidden. That even in Galus, a Yid is still supposed to recognize that he's a Yid, and therefore he's above the Galus. And in the context of this Sicha, He's on the way to Geula. Going somewhere, you're already there, right? If that's where your head is, that's where that's where your plans are, that's where you are really. And therefore, when the Yid expresses this in speech and in action, that really what he's B'chlal, not shaykh to the whole thing. He's not living in the same world as the Gentile. He happens to be in the proximity, but he's on the way to Mashiach. He's en route. So then he's not touchable. He's not really in the proximity. And the Rebbe says not only is not touchable spiritually, not even physically, as the story played out, that Yaakov, Mashiach hadn't come yet. We know from Chassidus that Yaakov was hoping to bring Mashiach right then, but he saw Esav is not ready. And therefore he did not go to Seir. It's not going to happen. It's going to wait a few thousand years. But still, it says right away in the next section, Yaakov came back home to Shechem, to his parents. Shalom. Not to his parents, to Shechem. Back to Eretz Yisrael, let's call it. Shalom, he came whole. And Rashi brings down, he came whole with his money, with his body, and with his Torah study. Nothing was affected from the whole business that he went through with Esav and with Lavan. He came whole, says the Rebbe, that when a person has this attitude, the lept geuladik, he's living Mashiachdik, he's already living with the future, and even now he's en route. He's not in Golos and he's waiting. He's en route, a gate. And therefore, he will not be affected and he will have completion in all of those areas. And the Rebbe delineates it in detail in the Sicha, that he'll have bon echayim b'zayin, he'll have healthy families, and he'll have livelihood, and he'll have children, and he'll also beruchni shalom b'toirasei. And the Rebbe says, especially now as you get ready for Mashiach, we have the complete Torah because we have the revelation of Chassidus. So we have the whole Torah, Nigla and Chassidus together. It's all whole and wholesome. And this is something that a Yid is able to experience even before Mashiach comes.